So where one Vince enters a topic, another one follows, but then a Jeff intervenes, and we have a legitimate debate. I'm James Linker. This is the Shredded Sports Science.
It's time now to turn this mush into muscles.
So on my Facebook page, I put a question in regards to this video, and I asked people their opinion. Do you train the dumbbell bench chest fly or not? And what are your reasons? Adam says, I have shoulder issues, so I always do them on the floor, so much better. Ryan says he does do the chest dumbbell fly for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's comfortable with his form and he allows a slight bend in the elbow during the eccentric. Mike says, for safety reasons, I do not let my dumbbells fly. Solid 5 out of 10, Mike. Sam says, I find them uncomfortable and not completely stable, so I just avoid them and do other accessories. Love your work, keep it up, correct. Fergus says, to be honest, due to erect clavicle, I've always avoided flies. Again, so he's basing that on his injury history, which is perfectly valid. Nick says, I do them, but I do them the way that Jeff recommends, almost exclusively. Troy says, I love flies. Jason says, I do it with lower weights and I use a pec deck machine. I'm doing volume training, so my weights are lower. I don't do dumbbell flies anymore as there's too much of risk of injury. And so I want to thank you for your input. So we have quite an interesting mix here. People are talking about chest flies in relation to their prior injury history. They're talking about the intensity, how much weight they use. They're conscious of their range of motion. There's so many educated and valid points that people are making. What is so great about this is instantly it shows you the variability with training. Instantly it shows you how exercise selection highly depends on your characteristics. And that's something I love to see in these comments. And so Jeff Cavaliere over at Athlean, he made a video last week, again explaining his stance on the dumbbell bench fly. And to be clear, he's not saying you should not perform fly movements. He's not saying that. And people are misrepresenting him in some cases. What he's saying is that he believes that the version on a bench with dumbbells has too much of a risk factor in relation to the risk reward, and therefore he believes there are more effective exercises that you can use in relation to safety and also a peak contraction. And so when it comes to the dumbbell fly, I touched upon this in the Alpha M video, but I think it's a really interesting debate. And so I do see a lot of people saying, don't do chest flies. Chest flies are terrible. You don't need them. We cannot say that. We cannot say that in a rational way because horizontal shoulder adduction is a legitimate bodily movement. Now, a loaded horizontal shoulder adduction is a legitimate training movement. There are physiological adaptations that take place. So we cannot say that training that movement is inherently wrong. In addition, we cannot say that, and I've had comments from people saying, well, I've been training dumbbell flies on a bench for a long time. I've never injured myself. I love them. I've made certain gains related to my training. I don't need to stop them. Again, I would not say to that person, you need to stop them. And so I think we have to have some balance here. But here are the caveats. I think there are a few points that we need to consider to make sure that if you do perform them, you are doing them as safely as possible. And here is why. Jeff Cavaliere, in his video, he explains the risk-reward of this exercise. And he touches on a few points. And his first point is obviously that the bench is an unsupported position, whereas if you're doing your flies on the floor, you have support and you don't have that potential for that extended range of motion, which can lead to a mechanically dangerous position for the shoulder joints and related muscles. And in the stretched portion of the lift, how you're unable to bear a large load due to the momentum. He also talks about a lack of peak contraction and full adduction at the top of the movement. And then he talks about the coracobrachialis muscle. And why he discusses that is because he says a lot of people like to do the dumbbell bench fly because they believe it gives them a real extra stretch on their pecs. Whereas actually, it's more the coracobrachialis muscle, which is the extra stretch you're feeling. And in his own words, he says that the pecs, the stretch from the pecs is absent or extremely minimal. And those are his words. And so that's some of his rationale. And then he gives alternatives, specifically floor flies and also cable flies. And he talks about how you can get this real conscious contraction, peak contraction with the cable fly. And that is absolutely important for concepts such as intramuscular tension and the activation of our motor units, muscle fibers, all these things that we are doing with our dynamic contractions, eccentric, concentric, exercises with load. And so interestingly, we have this coracoid process, which he talks about, which is the bone here, which attaches the coracobrachialis muscle. And the function of the coracobrachialis is for shoulder stability and adduction. And therefore, it really is this issue of having a stable shoulder, a safe shoulder during the chest fly, which is the problem. And absolutely, that is great information Jeff is giving. Now, some of you may say, well, what about machines? The thing about machines is it's very hard to give you a general answer because every machine is different. Every brand of a machine is different. And the reason for this is because different companies try to manipulate the strength curve. The strength curve being, where do you feel the most tension during the lift? At what part of the range of motion does it feel the hardest? And companies will actually try to manipulate this. And so different machines will feel different to you. And so I've made a few notes for people who do want to do dumbbell bench flies. What can you do to ensure that you're doing them as safely as possible? Well, first, again, load. Think about your resistance. This is not the sort of exercise you want to be using a heavy load with and a lower repetition range. Now that relates to your intensity. So you may say, well, how can I consistently make it harder if I can't keep increasing the weight? There are many ways you can progressively overload. Progressive overload is not linear. I have a video about that. Please go and watch that. You can increase the amount of repetitions, decrease the rest time. You can manipulate how fast you are performing the movement. There are many things you can do to make it feel harder without necessarily putting large weights in your hand. And so absolutely, with a chest fly, I would say in terms of risk reward, it is far more suitable to use a volume training type programming for that exercise. And importantly, controlling the weight during the eccentric phase, the stretching phase of the lift is very important too. Being conscious of controlling the weight and your range of motion is absolutely important. And of course, with repetition and practice, you're going to develop these motor patterns. You're going to develop the schema, this kind of exercise memory where you become more and more competent with a movement. And so absolutely, repetitions, and being sensible with this lift is a good approach to take. And the last one, and this relates to my friend Vince, and it's don't use this in an emphasized fatigue state. So what do I mean by that? Well, for example, supersetting it with a barbell bench press. And here's where Vince comes in. So in Vince's chest workout, he supersets the chest fly, which we've established has an element of risk to it in terms of the shoulder joints and the musculature around it. And the barbell bench press, this major compound, he's then supersetting with the chest fly. And so for sure, in terms of thinking about the fatigue when he's going to work that, and of course it's a different movement pattern, but absolutely there's a large overlap. And you can see how using a barbell bench press and then using the fly may lead to an increased state of fatigue, which could lead to some sort of form breakdown or some sort of lack of control, and just these general variables which could lead to injury. So please, if you're going to do something like a dumbbell bench fly, I would recommend that you don't superset it with a major compound barbell bench press. And so in summary, when we think of this exercise, again, we have to be balanced, we have to be non-tribal. This is not a bad exercise. You are not wrong if you do it. However, if you do it, for sure there are risks. Please be aware of it and please try and minimize these risks. If you choose, and from this video and others, if you decide this exercise is not for you based on your characteristics, please explore some sort of cable adduction, horizontal shoulder adduction movement, or another alternative such as the floor fly, as that may be more beneficial for you and save your shoulders from destruction. So that was a quiet week on the YouTube. You know, whenever I make videos such as the KSI video, I obviously know that if you're going to talk about someone with a large following, that they will get quite a reaction. You never know how much of a reaction and how much traction. And I never expected 170,000 views in a week. I never expected it to grow as it has. And although I do expect some of the comments and the emotional reactions, it still is fascinating. It really is fascinating. And it shows a huge disconnect between real applicable fitness knowledge and people's emotions and tribalism when it comes to fitness. And I just don't think it's helpful. I think we have to have an open mind. And I do actually want to touch upon something in that video, because some of you in this community dared to question me. How dare you question me and disagree with me and put ego bombs in my comment section, just kidding. I want to thank you for your input. I love the intelligent, articulate and informative comments that I get. And so I do briefly want to discuss the chest dips. Now, in that video, I said that, you should be careful when you're going down so far with your chest dips, the range of motion, as it can destroy your shoulders. I do stick by that statement for many people. I don't believe it's necessary to have such a deep range of motion. However, context is important. And I could have given more context, because some people rightly in the comments section, and they're members of this community, because I do recognize your profiles, said, well, actually, for me, I train calisthenics. I'm quite advanced. I have good shoulder mobility. I can use a deeper range of motion and not destroy my shoulders. And that's absolutely valid. And so, yes, absolutely, there are caveats. It does depend on your characteristics. Now, in the case of the YouTuber that I was showing in that video, it wasn't really just his range of motion that I didn't like. It was in the context of the training session. He had a real lack of control with his dips and the range of motion. And it was a cumulative amount of factors which I didn't really like. And I just felt that it was not safe for his shoulders the way he was performing them. But I could have been clearer that it was his lack of control through the eccentric phase, again, which would contribute to the increased risk with his range of motion. And so I'm James Linker. This is Shredded Sports Science. I will see you soon. Thank you.